So still welcome. We will get started. The presentation will be mostly about Data Factory. If you're here to learn something about Fabric, this is not the right place. So I just want to give a heads up. We good? Okay. I've compiled a PowerPoint slideshow with a little bit of demonstration as well about lessons learned that we had from my company. Basically, the struggles about how to monitor Data Factory, how to make sure that all the support is not for the engineers, but we can move that away from the engineers to the support desk. So that's the PowerPoint about today, and let's have a look. But first of all, thank you so much for the sponsors, obviously. Without these sponsors here, amazing guys, we wouldn't be here, or at least the tickets wouldn't be that cheap. So a little bit of an introduction about the schedule that we will be looking at today. I'll introduce myself after this slideshow. We'll be looking at a couple of key facts about monitoring, observability, Azure Monitor component that we will be using to really enhance that monitoring there. Something specific about Data Factory that we can use there, right? Grafana integration, and I've got exactly one slide about Fabric. That's it. Questions will be at the end of the slideshow, if that's all right. I'll try to keep it a little bit limited, 50 minutes-ish, so there's still enough time for questions if possible, if that's good. So yeah, my name is Dieter. I am born in Belgium, but moved to London about 5 years ago, just before Brexit. I'm an Azure MVP. I've been working with Azure since 2012, certified as well. What I do in my free time, scuba diving, hiking, blogging, I'm not sure if that's free time, traveling around. Would you have any questions even after this slideshow for today? You're very welcome to reach out to kind of my socials. Any questions will be answered for sure, and I don't charge for that, so don't be afraid of that. Good. I'm also the owner of AzureWatcher.com. If you're into kind of Data Factory and you want to keep up to date about all the latest, there's a weekly newsletter about new components on Azure or Microsoft, and Data Factory is one of them. So if that's kind of your thing, feel free to give me feedback on that as well. We can kind of change it along the way. Good. So let's have a look at observability and monitoring. What are kind of the traditional problems that we have, especially working with a distributed team, right? So when I say distributed team and distributed applications, I'm looking into, there's one team with Azure Functions, there's one team with Logic Apps, there's another team with a database, and then somewhere in the middle, we've got this kind of Data Factory integration. Typically, we have not too much end-to-end view there. It's kind of difficult to see, where the process has started, where we see the problems there, right? So really providing that insights on the observability is quite important, I think. And why is that? We want to reduce the time spent investigating, but also, reduce the problems reported by end users here, right? So typically for Data Factory, I'm looking at there's quite a lot of data that's being logged, traces from pipeline. We want alerting as well, but like kind of not too much, right? The right amount of alerting. And then I would say also for a reasonable amount of costs. So these are kind of the traditional problems that I see with kind of monitoring that. And talking about monitoring, I think there's 4 steps over here that we need to understand where there's a difference. So if you want to start monitoring your applications or enhance your observability, I would say start 1, 2, 3, 4, right? You can't do number 4 before doing number 1. So the first step would be capturing as many logs as possible. Traces, technical logs, functional logs, correlation IDs, order ID, customer ID, reference, you name it. It could be also metrics about performance, CPU, resources, and capturing all that data, right? Logging that into a resource will afterwards help you to provide visibility on that. And that's typically something we can do, right? Second step would then be, how do we query that data? How do we collect the right information out of all these logs so we can actually see what's going on, provide an end-to-end view, right? So that's what we call data visualization. It could be a very basic aspect. It could be kind of a fancy dashboard. I would say that's really up to you there. Once we've got that data available, we are looking into alerts, right? Alerting when something isn't happening, right? Alerting before end users are reporting problems. That can really help your system to keep it more up, right? Providing that more security, what's going on. And last step is obviously troubleshooting, right? So once we've got all these steps in place, They should really reduce the amount of time troubleshooting, but also I think with the goal in mind, you want to move that responsibility from troubleshooting problems from a data engineer or a software developer, to more of a kind of a support team, right? So it could be potentially technical problems that a support team could handle there. It could be functional problems they could be able to identify. And we don't want to have that conversation anymore where, development or data engineering team is overloaded with support questions. So try to offload that. That's really the goal here. I'm not sure if that kind of sounds familiar to you guys. When I hear these complaints, I see some people nodding, so sounds like a good thing here, good. So let's have a look first at what we have kind of by default, and this will be kind of a limited demonstration here, because there's already some functionalities in Data Factory that we can leverage to provide that view, of course, right? Can you guys see this at the back of the, yeah, all good, thank you. So I've got here a Data Factory instance here. The first thing we can observe here, obviously, is this basic monitoring. A little bit about failed and succeeded activities, right? We've got the monitoring here also on the left side, where we can select a couple of predefined listings. But also if we open the dashboard here, we also got a bit of a similar view with kind of the same query behind, and the pipeline runs as well. Now, I'm not too sure, but for me, this does not provide too much information. Often we are looking at overall statistics rather than something specific, right? So a question could be, how do we enhance this? There's one additional functionality which I really like that they kind of integrated it here, which is the alerts and metrics, right? So having that alert rule here could help you to, oops, shit here, by being able to create a criteria, right? Continue. And then a reason and a threshold, you can also set up alerts. Now, very quickly, if your Data Factory is only used by, I would say, a couple of pipelines, likely this is sufficient. But if you're using that cross-team with multiple instances, this becomes really difficult to manage. I think it's too broad, and you want to specify that, right? So, for example, integration with a ticketing system, or more visibility around the functional keys. Good. So what are the options that we have specifically for kind of achieving that through functionalities with Azure? Out of the box, we have something called Azure Monitor. Is there any hands up for people that have worked with this before? A few good, then I feel this is the right people here. Azure Monitor is a container or more of a functional aspect of a collection of resources that you can leverage in order to provide an end-to-end view, right? So it helps you to identify and fix the problems kind of faster. But for me, the main aspect here is that it's not only used for Data Factory, but you can use it across your entire Azure resources, right? So if you're using Logic Apps, if you're using databases, if you're using, kind of functions, anything else, I would say collect them to your Azure Monitor, and you will then be able to achieve kind of the same results with dashboard and visibility and alerting and monitoring there. So that's a good strategy in general. Now, specifically, how does it work? There's basically 4 steps involved here, right? So we've got collect, manage, and query, and act. The collection part is really where we ingest the logs from any application. It could also be a non-Azure application, right? So collect those raw logs and then store them in a space. Let's assume this space could be Log Analytics, right? Log Analytics is a resource where we can store logs, just as the word explains it, where you can manage schemas, where you can manage retention rates, and where you can also visualize the underlying logs, right? So these are stored there in the resource. In this kind of schematics, we are talking about Log Analytics. Afterwards, we can query them, kind of see what's going on there, right? And then the most important part, obviously from my point of view, is we want to act on that. And how do we want to act on that? It could be alerts, dashboards, third-party systems, the ticketing system, so all kind of that. So that's obviously the most important part here on the right side, but you have to go kind of through this setup, obviously. Without those initial logs and the knowledge there, you won't be able to have all the other steps. Specifically for data factory in mind, right? Because Azure Monitor is something you can use along all the Azure resources, right? I think there's a couple of interesting parts there, right? So we are looking at tracking pipeline runs, activity runs specifically. Is anyone still using SSIS packages? Is that still supported? Not too sure. You can use that as well, so there's more visibility on that. We've got also a little bit more built-in monitoring there in the portal, right? And then it's really up to, kind of what I said before, integration with dashboards run, and then kind of trigger things from there. So really to provide you some insights on how you can, approach it from a more technical point of view, right? So keep those data engineers, developers out of the scope and push it, to the support team. Look into correlation ID or business ID, order ID, customer ID, where you can create dashboards, allow them to search based on those functional keys instead of the technical keys, right? SLA dashboards, or potentially create warnings when you expect a file that's supposed to have 10,000 rows, 15,000 rows, but this file only has today, that's strange, 5 rows. So you can also act on that point of view, or just integrate that with your incident management. There's obviously more, but here's just a couple of ideas, and I feel like that's kind of the low-hanging fruit that we are talking about today. And then about the data factory specific again, we've got annotations and user properties. Who knows about them and is using them as well? So nobody's using them. Good. Well, I hope you will be using them after the session then. So annotations are static tags that you can assign to, for example, pipelines, triggers, and datasets. Now, why would you do that, right? Why would you assign that static text? We already have the name and the description there. Why would you add more text? That's really useful because when things go wrong, you will be able to also report on that, right? So those annotations are also logged into Log Analytics, and then you can really use those within your dashboard as well. Wouldn't it be nice if you can create an alert where you can already see, hey, this is the receiver, this is the sender of the data, this is the name of the flow, and then the technical pipeline name. Wouldn't this kind of be nice? So you can enrich the pipeline name or the data set with something more on a functional level. So that's the first part. These are static text. The next part that you could be looking at is user properties. And it's effectively the same, but you assign dynamic text there. And dynamic text, we are looking into something you can assign, for example, the order ID, right? So data that you're processing during that pipeline, which depends on kind of the data set itself, right? Shipping ID, order ID, customer ID is kind of a regularly used one. I think those are typically the business keys, right? But you can also use them for the technical keys such as run ID and correlation ID and all the other ones. So I suggest to use them kind of, to provide more insights on what's happening, who's owning them, and really, again, when things go wrong or you want to provide visibility on them, these are also logged. So it really enriches the existing logging that you have. So let's have a look at kind of the previous slideshows, because see a couple of people, what's that? And then we can kind of see how we can set it up. Good. So let's see at my kind of demo setup, right? I have two very basic pipelines. A pipeline which is called a get code pipeline and a random fail pipeline. The get code pipeline reaches out to an API and then just stores something in a variable. And then the random fail pipeline is just a basic pipeline to simulate a failure. It's a randomizer, and 1 out of 3 we will have an exception here. So again, on the annotations and user properties aspect, when I open the pipeline here, there's a small button on the right side, properties. And this one has obviously the name of the pipeline, but you can also add these annotations here, right? So this is what you can use to enrich the existing pipeline with metadata. You can also add JSON here to afterwards parse it much better, but this is just kind of one of the ideas that you can use. So that's the annotation part. Now, if we're looking at the user properties part, right? This is stored here, and the user properties part is really also capturing the output or any value that's being used within that same pipeline to store this as well as a property. So both these annotations as well as the user property is also logged, and you can use them later also in the visualization. Now, if I go to, because there's already something pipeline runs. So let's have a look where we can already see them by default within the portal, right? So when I look here at the pipeline run history, I can already see the annotations here, which does provide a bit of context, of course. And also we've got the exception here, right? So question is, how can we kind of enhance this, and how do we deal with this, right? So what you can do is, again, on the overview page, there is something called diagnostic settings. And this is really where we will be exporting those logs from Data Factory towards any destination, basically, right? So I've got something configured here. In my case, we will be sending that to Log Analytics, but you can choose multiple items as well. So there was a gentleman down, or a couple of people that were saying, hey, we still use SSAS. Here's where you select which kind of logs you want to kind of capture, right? So I've got now the pipeline runs and then the trigger runs as well. There's some more for SSAS as well and other stuff. So these are the execution logs effectively, but there's also metrics around resource consumption and all the other stuff. So you can also capture those, if you feel that's really what you want, right? So that's the source of what you want to capture. The destination then is really where do we want to send those logs towards, right? Where do we want to store them? So the first one in the list that you can choose is the Log Analytics workspace. Again, that's kind of look at this like kind of a database, but then specifically for Azure Logs, right? You can send them to there. They also support for Storage Account or Event Hub, and then Event Hub is really good for like custom integrations over here. So where do we end up with these logs, right? Looking at this Log Analytics workspace, right? This is a specific resource in Azure. Now, for the resource itself, it's not charged, but you will be charged per consumption. And so looking at the tables available, or the schematics, you don't need to create the schematics. It's automatically created on ingestion, right? I've got these very similar also table names here. Let me zoom in a little bit more. I've got these very similar table names here, which is really the schematics, and there's also retention. So for them, you can also manage the retention here. How long do I want to keep them? There's also a total retention period with an archive, which is a different pricing tier. So depending on the setup, you will be charged for the total ingestion of data in, I don't know, megabyte or kilobytes, right? Volume, and then how long do you want to retain them? So that's the charge here. And then how do we visualize them? This is really the logs part. And then you can click those open here. Again, we see those very similar logs here, right? So that one. Is everyone here familiar with KQL? I see a little bit of hands. It's more and more used, and also obviously if you guys can feel like into using streaming features in Fabric, for example, you will need to make yourself familiar with KQL. So I heavily suggest using that. Even if you don't understand KQL, you will be able to kind of follow the demo here. It's based on your previous SQL experience, I'm going to assume, right? So this one allows you to kind of see, hey, what kind of, let me do the pipeline runs here. Hey, what are the pipeline runs that we had, right? So what's the data that we've got available here? And you see there's quite a lot of data available here with all the executions and all the information, but that's kind of overwhelming, right? So why don't we have a look to see, hey, how can we kind of make this easier? First of all, I might be interested only in the failed pipelines, right? So 5 minutes of KQL course here, if that's applicable. So let's add a filter where the status equals to failed. Okay, that's good. We've got kind of those failed pipelines here. I feel there's still quite a lot of data. We've got most of the interesting properties, time generated, etc., etc. And again, you can execute those across all your Azure resources, including if you have multiple data factory instances, right? To create one complete dashboard. Now, potentially remember those annotations here that we had. Where is it again? So looking at the pipeline here, right? Remember those. I think these are also logged, and these really come in handy when visualizing the logs. In this part, I'm kind of, visualizing the first one, which seems to be the owner. So the owner is owned by the warehousing team here. Again, interesting. But maybe we want to kind of, enhance it a little bit because they look quite boring, right? Let's be honest. We want to have a little bit more Power BI kind of style, a little bit nicer, right? So there's more options with this. Let's see this. We will extend the list. Extend basically means create a new property here, right? And then there's a very small kind of if else. So if the status equals failed, then add a red button, succeeded green button, and if anything else, then just something else as well. So we can do this here, and this seems to be already a little bit nicer. There's a better view here on what's succeeded and what actually failed. But also let's now limit the amount of options here, and this is with a project function here. Project is in what SQL is a select statement. So from all the data here, instead of doing a select star, we will be looking at select, specific amount of columns. So we've got that. And this also provides a fairly good overview of, hey, this is the information I want. Is it successful or not? The timing, the pipeline, correlation ID for the execution, right? We've got the annotations over here that we have that we can also eventually visualize, see if something goes wrong. Start time, end time, and well, this looks already fairly good, this part. So what we can do now is also, let's create a dashboard out of this. So how do we approach this? There is a button here. I always need to look a little bit. Yes, save. And then there's a pin to Azure dashboard. So there's two functionalities basically where you can reuse the KQL to pin something and to reuse and visualize that result. It's either a dashboard, and that's more integrated within the Azure, Azure portal, or a workbook, which is a specific resource. Let's create a new dashboard. Let's call it SQL demo, create and pin. So this is now pinned, and I'm interested into kind of seeing it. How does it work? Where are we? So the dashboards can be found under, well, this specifically. And then on the top, you can also select the dashboard here. So this is the same query. With the edit button, I can kind of play around with this. It's a very intuitive kind of look and feel, where you can create specific dashboards, extend it, update the titles, etc., etc. Save it. It allows you to do some filtering as well, right? So maybe we want to see the logs from the past 7 days and the past 24 hours. So this provides a bit of an overview. Now, I gave myself a challenge, I think, when I made this presentation, 2-3 weeks ago-ish, right? What can I pin on the dashboard within 1 hour? And trust me when I say I'm not a KQL pack expert at all, like totally not. So what I made is basically this. I just want to provide a little bit of, influence on, hey, if you're going away tonight and next week you feel like playing around, what can you actually achieve with this knowledge, right? So where can I get in limited amount of time? So we've got logs about all the failed and succeeded pipelines here. We've got something very similar, but then with a little bit more details around the names of the pipelines, the annotations as well. We've got visibility around statistics, the amount of failures, the amount of succeeds, failure to success ratio. We have all the failures, including the errors and exceptions here. And then we can also visualize specific business keys. So remember the get code pipeline, which was a random, reach out to an API, get the quotation, and log it in the user property. You can also use that and visualize it over here on the dashboard. So this is all, I did this in a little bit less than 1 hour. you can also extend it to something more interactive, basically. So how do we make this more interactive? Because this looks only, visualization. Maybe you want to search on something without having the user needing to have the knowledge of the KQL, right? If they've got this, good, then they can execute the query themselves. Maybe not. And this is really where workbooks comes in handy. So a dashboard here is really part of the Azure portal itself. A workbook is a specific resource that you can also use through CI/CD and where you can make it a little bit more interactive. And my goal is here to, can we search along the codes and then find the pipeline and the correlation ID? And now, this is really where we autosave. Okay, delete autosave, I assume. So there's another option available here. So instead of the save, I think you can also send it to a workbook indeed, yeah. So this part, it will then create a new workbook or an existing workbook. And so instead of pinning it to the dashboard, you can create multiple smaller dashboards with a little bit more interaction there. How does it work specifically? In this case, I've got two sections, right? I've got, let me zoom in a little bit more. I've got this top section here where I'm allowed to search on a specific business value, for example, and I've got the logs that we showed here below. So let's see, for example, if I want to find something with the codes on the text, please. Oops, this is not going to work. We are then also allowed to kind of search along those pipelines execution with the logs that the annotations that we had. I've got something in the company I work with, something very similar, which is an order ID, and then with the order ID, what we can do is we have the order ID and then I think the department, and then based on something similar, we search along all the Azure logs, we visualize all the components, and then we can see, hey, this document was processed first in a storage account, and then a data factory picked it up, and then it was a logic app, and then something else. So it was able to provide a complete overview without the need of having that KQL knowledge specifically available. So we used that to send to support team and was like, hey, you guys figure it out from now. Don't reach out to us anymore because you've got the tools available, right? So that's this part. Now there's one last item potentially we want to look into. So obviously the by default alerting, right? So again, looking at very basic concept here where we want to visualize all the failed pipeline runs here. In this case from the last 24 hours. How do I receive alerting on this information? There is a button here also somewhere. Let's see. Create new alert rule. And so alerting is a whole section within the Azure Workspace. In this case, so remember when we looked into basic data factory opportunities, right? With, I think, metrics and alerting over here. This feature was rather basic. Remember, we couldn't really customize what was available. They had predefined information available on what do we want to receive an alert on. So looking at this here, for example, they only had this list of information available. You can obviously now customize that and write your own KQL query and then create an alert out of that. In this case, I've got only the ones where we have a failure here. We will be counting the rows if and then act on something. So the criteria is then also defined over here. If something is bigger than a certain amount within certain thresholds, we are expecting to take a certain action. So let's say that I want to have any alerts within the last, several, whatever it is, right? So whenever any failure occurs, and we will look at this every 5 minutes, I want to take an action here in this case, right? So that's the criteria, how to query it. Maybe you want to look at specifically, where pipeline name equals something else, or where customer, or where annotation is equal. So you can really extend this over here as well. Now, how do we take actions on this? This is defined in the next panel, and this is the concept of an action group. So actions are defined on what needs to be done whenever the alert threshold is reached, and what action do we then want to take. And the concept of an action group is you want to bundle actions together so you can use the same criteria for another one, right? it allows you to create new actions group from the portal or using an existing one. But then let's have a look at specifically the details here. Well, I think the most important part is, yes, this one. So you can also do an email or an app notification or an SMS. But I think the most, if you want to integrate, for example, with your ticketing system, no, create one more. Let's see. There is also integration with, where is this now? No. I think the quick actions doesn't provide all the opportunities here. Well, it also, yeah, never mind. So it allows you to kind of act on whenever the threshold is reached there. So I think that's quite useful here. I think we've got that. Good. I personally feel like the dashboard is quite useful, but maybe you want to have something more enriched, something better, right? Something more nicer, something more Power BI-ish like. Who feels like we want to have that? Yeah, why not, right? You can also integrate it with Grafana. And who used Grafana before? Who has heard from it? A couple of people, yeah. It's now also a really preferred kind of partner from Microsoft, because there's really good integration within the Azure monitoring system. I feel before it was only Power BI. We want to push those logs to Power BI and visualize it over there. But now there's a concept of managed Grafana, and it's all manageable within the Azure portal as well. I don't feel this is just an external supplier that I'm promoting. Absolutely not. It's really within the portal already integrated. So what is it? It allows you to have more enriched, better visualizations, dashboards available for any of the logs that you have within Log Analytics. It allows you to connect to your Azure Workspace and then create dashboards from there, which are more interactive than the one I showed you before. The good thing I do like personally is that there's a library available where you can import existing dashboards from other people, right? Or from them as well. And then you can also really build those dashboards based on pre-built, basically. Kind of a marketplace, effectively. So let's have a look at kind of a couple of ideas. So we're looking at kind of very enriched dashboards like this, or this. And this is one of the free templates that they offer. I think it's a community-based templates for Data Factory here. So yeah, if you want to go a little bit more advanced, what else do we have? Yeah, that's not too much. So let's have a look at this. So with Grafana, there's two options. Forgot to say that. So the managed Grafana part, right? So this part. You can go to grafana.com, do billing and servicing yourself there, and then integrate it with Azure. Or there is a concept of managed Grafana, where Azure will manage the instance for yourself. In this case, it's really up to you how you want to kind of leverage that. So how does it work? Remember, we had those, the share button here. We are able to kind of pin it to a dashboard or a workbook. Well, guess what? They also had pin it to Grafana dashboards. Honestly, like 2 years ago, I thought I should never look into Grafana because this is just another supplier. Until last year, I was like, yeah, Azure is really investing a lot of money into the integration of this, and it's generally a really good product actually. And people that feel kind of comfortable with Power BI, it has a very kind of similar look and view, so that's really good. So managed Grafana, how does it work? You don't need to. Managed Grafana allows you to have all the billing within the Azure Workspace. You create a new resource, which is called Azure Managed Grafana. I think the billing is per user, if I'm not mistaken. But it allows you to send also queries directly to that dashboard, specifically under your subscription, right? So let's see how we can share it here. We can pin this to a dashboard. And then so remember the item that I had here in my workspace, we are able to also find it back over here, right? So that's good, and then the resource. Now I did this already before the demonstration. Let's see how we open this. So this is effectively a bit of an empty box. But then if we open here, the endpoint, this is the look and feel. They also have their own kind of alerting and other stuff as well. But specifically for dashboards, it's quite well kind of enhanced and explained. So this is a very kind of Power BI look and feel where you can open the buttons and continue from there. Again, the options that you can do here is much more enhanced than the traditional workbooks and dashboards that you have within Azure. Not too sure why this is not loading here. Additionally, where you can also integrate this, for example, if I have my data factory here. So any resource within Azure, or most of them, they have a metrics tab. Let's see here, it failed. Let's just open something where we have some kind of information. You can do the same also. So, from metrics point of view, you can also just pin it to Grafana. So the integration within kind of the Azure space is quite well done over there. So yeah, highly recommend it to if you feel like, hey, we want to have something more enriched, we want to have something more interactive, and look at the templates that obviously the templates that they offer. So maybe last note about kind of Fabric, because I feel like a lot of the features are coming out of preview, right? So what's the difference then with Fabric? Fabric also has a concept of diagnostic settings where you can send to Azure Monitor, but the concept is very different. The data that you can send is very different. It's more about the health of the cluster rather than the pipeline execution itself. So there is obviously a shift if you feel like, hey, I want to migrate Data Factory to Azure Fabric. Have a look at the documentation, kind of the differences there. They have their own kind of monitoring, a little bit different. So that's always good to know. A couple of resources if you feel like, hey, I've got nothing else to do in the evening. My wife divorced me or my husband divorced me. So these are a couple of resources. I will also upload the slides to whatever resource we have, right? A very good book is this one here, Cloud Observability with Azure Monitor. Highly recommend it. It's quite a big book, but if you want to walk through all the steps and the observability a little bit more in high level with questions and actions how to take, this is really good. I hope your Azure administrator has this book already. Obviously, if not, just give it to them. That's it. So feel free to ask questions, or if there's any questions, then I would say now is the right moment. Yes, absolutely. I think the gentleman over there has a question. Who's got the microphone, please?
Do you have solution to show on the one dashboard data from few log analytics? Because I have data factory, few data factories with own log analytics. And what is the way to show on the one dashboard or in one query?
I will try to repeat the question or rephrase it, and I just want you to confirm. Is the question, I've got multiple data factories and I have one log analytics, how do I visualize them? Is that correct?
Multiply data factories and
yeah.
Each data factory has its own separate log analytics.
Yeah, that's, okay. So the question is multiple data factories and multiple log analytics.
How to show on the one dashboard?
Well, I would advise you not to do that. What else can I say about that? There is something new, but I'm not too sure if it's going to work. So this is let's kind of try it out here. There is a new. I'm not sure if it's still in preview or already in preview. There is something where you can select the source as well. I think with the workbook you can cross. Let me hold on. Let me go back here. Yeah. So I do have this workbook here somewhere. Where's the workbook? Let me see. I think here you might have the option to kind of select the right resource, but I haven't played around with this. But yeah, honestly, I can't give you too much advice rather than have a look if. I think there is an option here where you can select multiple of them. Yeah, hope that answered the question. Maybe there's restrictions around it needs to be in the same subscription. So again, if there's any, I know there is some support, but it's very limited, I believe. Yeah.
So let's assume that my client is concerned about the sensitivity of information on the logs that the applications are generating. So he's asking us not to use Azure Monitor. How would you respond to that concern? Is that a real concern?
So where is the concern about? Are you logging GDPR sensitive data?
Being owned by Microsoft somehow? Is that a real concern for my client?
Yeah, I can't really answer that question because I'm not from Microsoft, right? But I'm just kind of challenging you here. If I can't log the data and you think this is not applicable or you don't want to do that, then why do you process them on the same environment? Maybe you kind of have to answer that question here. Obviously with logging, don't log any personal data, credit cards, etc. Don't do that. Salary information, also don't do that. Yeah, so look at what you want to log, obviously. Yeah, there's a whole chapter on that. It's also in the book. So evaluate what you want to log and limit the options there. So you limit the risk of exposing sensitive data, but also, less logging means less expensive. So yeah, I hope that helps.
I'm wondering, is it possible using the KQL tables to track the parent-child relationships between the pipelines? Yeah, because let's say I've got some task daily pipeline that runs some child pipelines, and as far as I saw, these KQL tables are like flat. Yeah, so each row is like some kind of an action that happened.
Yep.
So is it possible to somehow visualize or track the parent-child relationship? Because I would like to expose to the business user. Yeah. To expose to the business users the visibility what's going on right now. But for instance, task daily is started. Now it's like reloaded already the stage, the ODS, and now it's loading, let's say, some kind of a data mart or data product. Yeah. So is it possible via the KQL tables itself?
I'm going to assume that there's no kind of special starting from the pipelines, and the answer is yes. So you can correlate them as well. So the logging that we've seen, there's activities and pipelines, and you will see parent correlation ID and correlation IDs there, which you can then join. And by joining those tables,
so that's this correlation ID that's just behind you, yeah? Like we've got the pipeline name and the correlation ID.
Yeah, so there's a bit of, I think I wrote a blog post around this, if you feel like, walking around. So there's information about the pipeline run, which has the correlation ID, but I believe there's also a parent correlation ID here. Let me have a look for you. Yes, but it's a really good question because that's really what I want to hear. You want to build an end-to-end view, right? And not just like one pipeline, that's it, or one component. So this one, yeah, I don't see it at this stage here. But the answer is yes, it's possible. Because if you look at Data Factory, you also see I don't have any of the parent's child, but if you look under the tree, they also have that kind of visualized over there, right? So yeah, you would try to join those correlation IDs together with the activities and it should be possible. It's possible.
Okay, cool, thanks.
What is the best way to get information from log analytics and put them into the external database, like into Snowflake or any other database, because we have our own monitoring system based on our database, and I would like to put the data from Azure to inside.
Good question. So how do we get the logs from Log Analytics or any logs into a custom system, I assume? So looking at the setup that we've got, let's go here to my data factory, right? And now I might just want to take the PowerPoint with me again. So what I suggest is, you don't need to log here to Log Analytics, but you can send it to any destination. Well, any is very vague, but there's a couple of options, right? But that's effectively my idea here. So looking at the diagnostic settings, when I change my diagnostic settings here, we've got this Log Analytics here, but I'm a bit hesitant of pulling them out and then sending them to something else. I think it's better just to send them directly to an event hub, which then sends them to your custom logging, kind of whatever you have there. Because then you skip the Log Analytics part, I would say. So send them directly to your system if you can use them. I don't think there's really a way to pull them out in the way how you kind of fashioning it. That part.
Okay, thank you.
No more questions. Do we have something online? No? Okay. And thank you so much for being here, and have a nice day.